But also, I've had
You may be seated. I want to thank you all for coming this afternoon to the senior oral of Miss Addi Todd. Addi was the senior assistant in Algebra Half B this year for me and did an awesome job. And with me on the panel today are Mrs. Westfall and Mr. Schumann. So probably many of you have been to an oral before, but Addi will present her speech, and then we'll sit and we'll have a panel conversation with her, and it will last about an hour, and it will be awesome. So I'll open us in prayer, have a seat, and then we can begin. Thank you, God, for this day, for your goodness and your faithfulness, for your heart for the widow and the orphan. I pray just that we will be ready to receive what you have for us to hear through Addi's message today, and direct her speech. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
I want you to imagine something. Your alarm goes off before the sun comes up. It's freezing without any heat. You get out of bed and begin the daily task of getting 4 kids ready for school. You fix their hair, help them dress, and change the baby's diaper. You move carefully because the bruises on your arm and back are still sore. You sigh as you look into the kitchen among the trash and empty bottles, knowing there's nothing to give them for breakfast and nothing to pack in a lunch. Then, while it's still dark, you walk the 2 miles to the bus stop, holding tightly to the children's hands. You wait patiently for the bus and are relieved when it arrives. After a short ride, you arrive at school and walk into your 5th grade classroom. This scenario, from the point of view of an 11-year-old girl, may be difficult for many of us to fathom, but it is the reality of the approximately 424,000 children in foster care. In addition, there are 22 million families raised by a single mom, and 34 million in poverty in the United States. This is an astounding and heartbreaking number. It's important that we, as believers, understand the magnitude of the problem and what causes people to find themselves in these situations. James 1:27 says this: "Religion that is pure and undefiled before God, the Father, is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction." The Bible clearly states to care for orphans and widows, yet there seems to be a great amount of confusion in the church as to what that means and how to do this. Many people may ask if it means that every single person is called to serve these types of people. Other people may assume that it is the government's job to take care of orphans. The truth is that the church is specifically called to play a role in the lives of orphans, foster children, and widows, and cannot leave it up to the government to do. This truth can be discovered in 3 steps: uncovering what keeps believers from doing this, why the government cannot on its own, and what the church's role can be. One reason the issue of foster care continues to be an area of need is because brokenness among families is a cycle. A child who ages out of the foster system oftentimes carries trauma from their biological families or from their time in foster care into adulthood. Many of these children never witness what a healthy family looks like, leaving them with no roadmap as they become adults and are attempting to figure it out on their own. In advanced literature this year, we read a book called Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Within this book about a dystopian society, there is a part where Huxley describes how they attempt to shape their children to fit into certain classes. One way they do this is by playing a recording while the children sleep that repeats ideas that they want the children to believe about themselves. This then shapes the children's views of themselves and their thinking, which affects their abilities. This may seem like an extreme example, but children who are in negative situations where they're exposed to bad events or told horrible things about themselves often struggle to grow. According to children's rights, children who experience this trauma are statistically more likely to spend time in jail, commit suicide, become homeless, or have children in the foster care system. Children cannot be expected to know how to navigate growing up and making decisions when they lack the support system responsible for teaching those things: a family. If we look at the core of the problem, we will find that the breakdown of the family is the cause. That must mean that if we can strengthen the families in our communities, as well as help those who are fostering children, we can make a real difference in the number of children placed in the foster care system in the future. Many believe the government should be fully responsible for helping these disadvantaged children and families. They trust that the system is effective in handling reports of abuse and neglect, investigating and removing children from dangerous situations, and providing financial support. Many Christians feel like there isn't a need for churches to become involved because the system already exists. In addition, they may be aware of high issues of turnover among social workers and an overburdened system, and feel as though if the government hasn't been able to solve these major issues, the church won't be able to either. However, the government lacks what Christians and the church has in abundance, and that is the ability to bear the burdens of others through love. The singular way that we are able to bear each other's burdens is through relationships. Timothy Carney discusses this idea of relationships being the antidote for these hurting people in alienated America. It all adds up to this: Americans are less attached to society, their neighbors, their communities, other humans. Lacking the environment of a strong community, more Americans lack the scaffolding to climb above their starting point. More Americans lack the support structure that they would need to build a family. More Americans lack role models, and they lack roles. Communities and relationships create a structure for success and perseverance through accountability and encouragement. Government is unable to provide these things for multiple reasons, such as lack of time, resources, and people to fully commit to long-term support for those who are struggling. Relationships cannot be built by force or law. Instead, they must be built out of genuine care and commitment for another person. If the government cannot fully provide this help, then who can? There is indeed an answer, one that may seem simple at first glance: the church. God calls his people to look to the community and see what needs to be done to help it prosper. For once we do that, we can find spiritual prosperity as well. There are many areas in our own community that are often blocked out and not being poured into. This includes the foster crisis, those enslaved to drug addiction, and single-parent homes. All of these things are connected, and if the church focused their energy in a genuine way towards any of these people in those situations, it would improve the other ones as well. So, why isn't the church doing this? There are three things that often keep believers from acting in these areas: judgment, comfort, and unawareness. Oftentimes in America, we live in bubbles based on our income, religious beliefs, and education. The unknown, uncomfortable things are pushed away, and we find distraction from them in work, material things, and people similar to us. This leaves a disconnected community and a lack of support for those who are falling behind. To explain further the three things holding the church back, let's begin with judgment. We often look at those around us and immediately judge them instead of taking a further look to consider how we could help them. This is mostly because of our natural instinct to judge others in order to elevate ourselves. This is something that is promoted by our society and becomes an unhealthy habit. This judgment discourages us from reaching out and helping others by making us think that if we associate with them, we too will be judged, or even making us feel as though we are better than them, so it is their fault that they are struggling. The second thing, comfort, is a huge enemy of believers. Comfort keeps us from fully letting go and pursuing God's calling to serve out of fear it will be dangerous or different. When we see people different from us or in a hard position where we know it is our responsibility to help them bear their burdens, we often shy away out of fear it will be inconvenient for us. But oftentimes the greatest growing experiences and impactful moments are not comfortable. but they are absolutely worth it. Unawareness among believers and people in general is being uneducated in the pain those in their community are truly suffering. As we discussed earlier, the foster crisis is huge, and it is happening in America, in Texas, and right here in Midland. It affects many children in our own hometown that we may never know about because it is not discussed. Oftentimes, someone will proclaim a great message about fostering a child or adopting for one Sunday in the whole year, and then leave. A small number of parents will want to expand their family as well as help an orphan child, so they say yes and adopt a baby. While this does help a child in need, it does not dig deep into the true issues of the broken foster care system, as well as getting the church as a whole involved in serving. How does the church push past these things? And why should it care to in the first place? God calls us to seek the good of the city, as it says in Jeremiah 29:7. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. This verse is discussing a calling to the exiles from Jerusalem who are under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar. This verse remains relevant today. Despite disagreements or brokenness in our government, we have a role in being servants to help and improve the systems in place. The goal of the church should remain the same in spreading hope and serving the community, no matter the systems in place within it or the government leaders over it. Think about it this way. The bubbles we choose to place ourselves in can only last so long. The suffering of the community will soon break the bubble as it spreads and grows. And it should. Our hearts should break for the things that break the Lord's heart. And his people being neglected is truly heartbreaking. During the process of preparing my thesis, I became aware of a perfect example of this in our own community. Ironically, after finishing my paper, the government began sending migrant children to be held in our community. Prior to being involved with foster care, and with the knowledge I've gained through the research for this thesis, I probably would have been focused on the political and governmental issues surrounding the situation. I've heard many in my community voice the same concerns and express anger about it. While the anger at the way that it has been handled is probably justified, and I personally do not agree with how it was handled either, what I do know is that they are also God's children just as we are. And our greatest commandments are to love and serve them despite our political views or disagreements. The gift we have of life, healing, and freedom is not to be kept within our circle of Christian small groups and private school friends. It is to be spread out and lived to all types of people. When interviewing Dr. Brandon Logan, a family advocate who works at One Accord, he spoke about this idea of all types of people serving in different ways, no matter what they feel their calling is. It all comes back to families that are the building blocks of society and the building block of the kingdom. And so there's an opportunity to not pull people away from their calling, but to broaden their calling to this work. Caring for children in the foster care system does not have to look like adopting a child. It can be in many different platforms and areas. For not everyone is called in the same way to serve people. If you're unable to financially add another child to your household or for other reasons cannot serve in this way, you can still greatly impact the foster community. It is all in how we use our time and gifts. For example, if you're a great teacher or student, you can help a foster child with their homework. This is something that fulfills a huge need because most of these children are struggling and behind in school. If you enjoy cooking, you could help a foster family by bringing them meals. Other examples of way to help include becoming a certified babysitter or respite provider for foster families, running errands, providing rides for other children in the foster family, and donating clothing and shoes. If you're a young person, you can help by sorting clothing donations, doing household chores for a foster family, or you can simply just spend time with these children and mentor them. If you have the time to help, you can invest it in many different ways. If you have no time but have resources to help, you can always donate other clothes or items so that these children have things to call their own. If serving foster kids is not your thing, you can help parents trying to recover from different struggles so that they can get their kids back. Each of these small things really do affect children in a big way. I don't want to approach this from the standpoint that each of these things has to be a difficult thing to do. God blesses us immensely when we are obedient, and the rewards of serving him are indescribable. I know this from experience. I've spent time with the 11-year-old girl that I mentioned earlier. Her and her sister lived with my family for a time. I had the privilege of helping her make her lunch for school from a kitchen full of food, and I have never seen someone so grateful. Neglected children in the foster system, and the root of it, struggling parents, must find help in the church. Despite the vast amount of these children, and even parents, it is not impossible. There are many small ways and big ways to help that make a huge impact. But if the church continues in excuses and unawareness, the problem can only get worse. We must step up and show the kind of love and boldness that Christ did when serving those who are seeking hope. There is no time to waste. Holding on to this gift and this love we have to share by ignoring hurt people only creates bigger issues. Through relationships and using our talents from God, healing can be brought to the broken foster care system and broken families in America. Thank you.
You did it?
I did.
You didn't pass out. That was one of your main goals.
Yeah,
right?
it really was.
Check. All right. Well, the traditional first question. Tell us what your plans are after you graduate in a week and some change.
I plan to go to tech and study nursing.
And what's your ideal place you would land after that?
What I really want to do is do missionary nursing, like travel to different places and use the skills that I learn to share with people who don't necessarily have those resources. So.
Interesting. That's a plot twist. I hadn't heard that yet.
Yeah.
So, let's see. Tell me about your process of choosing this as your topic for your thesis.
So, I kind of talked about with you how I was going in between doing something about, I guess, it had to do with journalism and what sources we can trust in journalism. And I felt okay about it, but I didn't feel great about it. And then you were kind of encouraging me a little bit, like, you wanted me to do what I wanted to do, but you could also see that I had passion for talking about fostering. And so I think it was over Christmas break or one of those, or a weekend or something, and I was talking with my mom and one of my great aunt, and we were just talking about the foster system and just our experiences with it. And I realized I had a lot of like sadness and even some anger about, that darkness in our world. And I realized it was passion that I have for that. And so I decided that it's what I wanted to be able to share with everyone else. So.
Yeah, well, you picked a topic that you have personal experience with and that you have strong opinions about, and I'm hoping that some of your fieriness about it all comes out in the panel discussion. It came out maybe a little bit in your speech, but I'm going to try to poke the bear here, so we'll see. Okay, so you referenced the book of James. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction. So there's a lot of brokenness in the world. There's a lot of needy people groups. Why do you think James zoomed in on those two in particular, widows and orphans?
I think that with widows and orphans, what they have in common is they're both lacking a family. And I think this kind of shows how much God values family and how much family is necessary to have that kind of support in your life and in being able to overcome trials in that way. And so I think this calling is to step up specifically for those people and form that family for them when they're lacking it, because it is valuable.
Interesting. So, this was James, Jesus' brother. I didn't actually see Jesus doing this very much. He wasn't a foster dad that I know of, and I don't think he visited orphans. Why don't you think he did? Or maybe he did.
That's a good question. I think Jesus clearly had a love for children and young people, but I also think that when he was on Earth, his mission and his goal, it's not because he didn't care, but he was trying to share a message about the Lord and what was to come. And I think in the way that he lived and how he loved people, he did reflect how we are supposed to do that. And so I think if we are striving to be like Jesus, that does mean loving people like this, because he did love all kinds of people, and he sat and he walked with a lot of people. And just because he didn't do it in the form of fostering a child directly, I think he in small ways he did it. Like I said, you don't have to adopt a child, but he loved them and he encouraged people to love them. And so I think indirectly he did serve those people.
So it kind of seemed like maybe one of the broader things that Jesus did that instead, or in what ways did he?
I think that Jesus absolutely sought after the good of the city. I think especially in the way that he could have just gone about it by spending time with people who seemed respectable,
yeah,
I guess you could say, in the cities and doing it that way. But instead he spent his time with all kinds of people. He spent his time with prostitutes and tax collectors, and that's because I think it's important that those people are reached and loved.
It's interesting, though, that, I mean, I guess if I was thinking about seeking the good of Midland, Texas, it seems more efficient to, like, be friends with the mayor and make connections with people in power, because that would be the way that I could, like, have the farthest reach. Why don't you think Jesus did that?
I think with Jesus specifically, there are two reasons. I think, first of all, Jesus came to serve people, and he humbled himself to do that. He wasn't trying to find a high position of power. And I also think it comes back to what I said with the brokenness in the community will break the bubbles that we choose to live in. And I think that means, in a personal way, going out and starting relationships with those people. I think going to the mayor or something, you could start a program, or you could share one message, kind of like I discussed, but until you go out and you create relationships, I don't think a lot is going to change, and I think Jesus saw that.
But don't you think that's inefficient? I mean, couldn't Jesus have had a farther reach if he had followed my plan instead?
Well,
I make good plans.
it's just whether you're going to show up on time for them.
Yeah, that's right. Wow.
I'm
just like that.
That is a good question. Can you repeat it one more time?
Isn't that inefficient? I mean, it just seems like his reach could have expanded faster and further had he talked to the people in charge instead of hanging out with all the people on the fringes.
Can I ask you a question about what
sure.
you're trying? Okay. Through talking to the people in charge, what in your mind are you thinking he would accomplish through that?
Well, I mean, I guess, if he had talked to the priests instead, or the Sadducees, they already have a big network, and so programs get built by people like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and so why wasn't Jesus in the business of making programs? I guess is maybe what I'm asking, because that seems more efficient than building relationships.
I think really looking into it, and we can see it in our own community, programs are not always efficient, especially when handling things like parents who are struggling with drug addiction and children who are being neglected, because you can't see into everything that's happening. It's not personal, and so some things get dismissed, or for the example of parents, they can go through a program when struggling with drugs, but once the program ends, who are they going to? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's with relationships, like I said, it's long-term commitment, and it's genuine care for someone. And when reading Alienated America, they referenced there's a movie, it's called Hillbilly Elegy, and I think that's also the name of the book, and it's about this guy named JD, and he grew up in a very broken family, and he had a lot of struggles around him, but his grandma believed in him and she pushed for him. And even though there were programs and that his parents went through and things like that, like until his grandma stepped up and constantly pursued him and fought for him, that's when he saw change and he was able to go very far in life. And I think that's true, is like programs can't be personal and programs can't change people's hearts like relationships can.
That's good. It makes me think of a quote from a hero of mine and Mr. Schumann's. I just lost his name. Culture making. Oh, Andy Crouch. There we go. The first part's not quite as relevant. It says, "Fear spreads far and fast, but love is local and slow." And it just takes time to cultivate those kinds of relationships, and even if it's inefficient. Thank you.
All right, good job, Addi.
Thank you.
All right, so you mentioned that your family has been involved in foster care and that you got to work alongside this girl and hear her story personally. You could also say that you grew up in a Christian bubble, in a sense. So what was the most surprising thing to you in having a relationship with her?
I think there are two things. The first one is, I think it's hard for us, especially if we grow up in the Christian bubble and we see our parents and they're supposed to be in this role of caring for us always and supporting us in things that we do, and always showing up. It's hard to fathom parents not doing that and seeing a child who is actually affected negatively by their parents or even hurt by their parents. And so I think with meeting her and her sister and talking to them, you realize the reality of it. And that's not to say that their parents are horrible people, because like I said, I think we are called to serve them as well, but it just makes it more real, and you realize that it is a problem and it is something that kind of hits you. And the second thing I realized from being able to serve her and talk with her is that I learned that I'm very selfish, and I'll just be very honest about that. It's like I realized I thought I did well with serving people and serving kids for 30 minutes at church or something like that, but then when someone is living in your home and you're actually constantly around them and given this opportunity to show them Jesus, and I think you just realize all of a sudden all of the discomfort that I talked about earlier, you feel that, and then in that I realized that I was very selfish, which I think was a good thing. It was a good moment for me to see that.
So you could say your family was working to be a blessing to these two girls, right? And I think we would all acknowledge that. But do you think, through the series of events, do you think that the children were almost more of a blessing to you?
Absolutely. I think you can learn a lot from children, and especially children who face trials and struggles like that, because despite the things that they witness and experience, they still have childlike hope, and they have desires and goals that they want. And I think that we can learn a lot from them in that area and in a lot of other areas.
So if there was one tangible thing that you took away from that experience of being, I don't know what the right term, I don't know that it would be called a foster sibling or a sibling, I don't know what you would call it, but if there was one tangible thing you took away from that experience that you're going to use in relationships or in your life going forward, what would it be?
I think something that I learned a lot of things from them, but I think one in particular is trust. I think when we've been hurt by people or when we have experiences that disappoint us, we're so quick to put our guard up and say, no, not going to let that happen again. And I do that a lot. But just seeing how they allowed us to be in their lives and they trusted us even though they had been hurt it's an inspiring thing. And I think we can learn from that, because even if we do get hurt, the Lord is amazing at healing us and comforting us, and He doesn't want us to live with our guard up. So.
Right, that's good. So is your thesis the first thing that you've written about the foster care system?
The first thing I've read?
Written?
No.
Okay, can you share a little bit more about what you've written?
Yes. I write blogs for The Attic, which is a foster care network that Mr. Waller and his wife and family started, and they do awesome things through. And so I have the privilege of writing blogs for them. So
what topic do you like to write about most?
I don't have a topic in particular, but my favorite thing is getting to share stories about them, and then also lessons I've learned from them, like in a mix. It starts with a story that might not seem like it had some valuable lesson, but I can sit there and think about it and realize that it was very impactful. So that's probably.
Okay. You mentioned some of the reasons that the church is resistant to wanting to just jump all in the foster care crisis. And one of the things that you didn't mention, but that I've thought about before, is just is I consider the idea of perhaps bringing a foster child into my home, like at the forefront of my mind is my own children and what I might be exposing them to, or what I might, I don't know. I guess it kind of goes to comfort that you talked about, but what would you say to a parent that has that objection or that concern?
That is I haven't thought about that one a lot because I'm not a parent, but that is a very good one. I would say, I think there are, especially with older kids, there's a lot of burdens that they carry with them. And I think that we kind of view them sometimes, and I definitely did this before I actually met children like this, is you kind of view them as, they can't, it can be scary and you don't know what to expect from them, but once you meet them, they're really just children, and they're very different than what you think. But what I would say is I would be careful about that, because the safety of your children and family are important, and God calls parents to care for and protect your family. And so I think it's being cautious, but not so cautious that you just immediately say no. I think it's something that you consider and you talk about. And also, if you feel like a placement isn't right for your family, if you choose to foster, I think it's okay to pray for that child that they would find the right family, but being okay with saying, this might not be good for my family.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for talking about your passion.
Yeah.
We had government last year, or last semester. I guess that was last year too, right?
We did.
So, do you remember what the purpose of government class was?
Oh, dear. Oh, no. I promise I listened in government.
Oh, I know you did.
It was my favorite class. The purpose of government is to create... I'm not going to say it the perfect way, but...
There's not a perfect way.
Okay.
Government's messy.
It's to create citizens who are involved and also educated in their government, and also trusting that God is sovereign. That was not a great way to say that, and I don't know if it was right, but that's all I got.
No, you hit all the boxes on that one.
Okay.
So informed citizens that are active in doing good throughout the world while also trusting in God's sovereignty.
Yeah, that.
So we said it differently every time. So that's So there you go. Did the government class help you or hinder you or have no effect whatsoever on how you view just this crisis that you're talking about?
I think at first it made me feel a little bit hopeless, just kind of seeing, I guess with the government there's a lot of things that the government is responsible for, and so I think that the government does definitely do things well, and I do think it's necessary, but I think there's areas that can't be poured into from the government just because it's not super personal and it's huge. But I think it just made me realize more how much it's important that we as believers get involved, because I think you realize the government is necessary, but it is not capable of filling every single role that needs to be filled in every system, especially the foster care system.
So what would you say the government's role and responsibility should be in the area of protecting these vulnerable kids?
I think that it should be the government's responsibility, as it is, to help remove children from situations and handle the reports for it to an extent, because I think in areas it is efficient for the most part. It's not a perfect system and it's not always efficient, but I do think they have specific workers in certain roles and they have certain laws set to protect children, but I do think they can't fully do it because there are areas that are missed and there are parts that they can't do, but I think they play a role in enforcing laws and the safety of children.
Okay, so I'm going to take a little different direction with kind of a current event. So right now, at the support level, there's a court case called Fulton versus the City of Philadelphia. It was argued a couple of days after the election, so nobody paid attention to it. And there's a ruling that's expected to come down in June. And what this case entails is the City of Philadelphia is removing taxpayer funds and the ability for a Catholic foster organization to continue to place kids in families because it's not in line with the LGBTQ plus movement that's going on. Do you think that the state should force Christian churches to choose between adhering to its religious convictions and carrying out its mission, which would entail James 1:27?
It's definitely unconstitutional to do that, because we do have religious rights in America, and we should. And I didn't know about that, and that's very heartbreaking that that's happening. But I absolutely don't think that that's right. But I do think, hopefully, it's an opportunity for people with a heart for those kids to step up, and even though the government is not handling it correctly, that they would continue to take care of those kids.
Well, that ruling hasn't come down yet, so we don't know how the Supreme Court's going to decide. It should come in June. But if the next question, and this is really the one I want to get to, if the state does force the church, and it's not just the Catholic organization in Philadelphia, but if the state does force the church to decide between those two things, how should the church act? Does it release us from James 1:27, where we can say, God, no longer have to do that one because the Supreme Court ruling?
What are they choosing in between again, or what is?
It's forcing the Catholic. It would be forcing if it decides against the Catholic Church, and that then they'd say you cannot no longer be a part of the foster. You no longer be a foster agency that places kids in homes unless you get in line with the agenda.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
So the question is, if the state does actually decide that, what, as a church, how should we respond to that?
I think, as I said earlier, I think we need to stay strong in what we feel our calling from God is over political views, and I don't think that means disrespecting the leaders in place, because I think there also is a calling to respect those people from God, but I do think that doesn't mean you give up, and I think that means if that calling is important to you, God's calling is way greater than anything the government or that law could put in place.
Okay, so for my last question before I pass it back to Mr. Perea, if you could come up with the best policy, with all the limitations that policies have, if you could come up with the best policy or impact one family where you were able to, through relationship, which do you think would have the greater impact? If you could only choose one of those two.
That's a good question. It's hard because with policies, I think there's a lot of there become loopholes, and there become a lot of issues in that. I also don't know if there is a perfect policy that would ever be able to apply to every situation and be helpful for every single family and every child. So I don't know. I think if the perfect policy did exist, I would definitely think that would be good, but since I don't, I think helping a family and really being able to impact them, because then I think in turn that would create a bigger impact in how they take that and impact others, and I think it would just continue to grow, whereas with the policy, I don't know that there would be a perfect one.
Thank you. I like that answer a lot.
You're doing great, Addi.
Thank you.
Still haven't passed out.
I know. I'm working on it.
Okay, so a few questions from the cloud. Another shout out to Mr. Nelson.
Oh no.
This is a seems like it speaks to what you read in your book, but we'll see how you want to answer it. What would you say about when the United States began becoming less community focused and more individually focused, and what sparked that transition? Give us a history lesson.
Oh dear. I'm trying to think.
The next one's way easier, so don't worry.
Oh, that's comforting. If we can get there, we might be sitting here for a minute. I did listen in history class. I promise. There's a lot.
In the Alienated America book, like, what were some of the other things that he pointed at that just said, "Hey, these are some of the things that cause the problem." Whether you can pinpoint the first one or not, just what are some of the factors that have gotten us here?
Okay, so this was surprising to me. I don't know that this is. I don't know, but they talked about how, especially in economics and in the in jobs in America, factories became less and less common for people to work in because they had machinery and things like that. And so with that, there became a lot more individualism because people weren't working in factories and working in that same way together and in assembly lines and things like that. And it discussed how through this idea of working together and teamwork, there was a man who talked about how he lived a very simple life. He didn't do things that would be seen as extraordinary to other people. He worked his factory job for many, many years, but he talked about how he thinks something valuable he learned was how to work together and the importance of working hard, and that reflects in how he takes care of his family. He wants to work hard to take care of his family, and he wants to have a family because community matters to him like it did in his job. And he talks about how, especially in the oil field, people find jobs in the oil field and they're able to separate themselves from family, and a lot of younger men work in the oil fields and they're away from their family, and how
soon after you wrote your paper, I was wondering what just as you watched your own story play out this semester, how you saw what did you do in response to that? And yeah, we'll start there.
Okay, so it was very shocking hearing about that. I kind of didn't believe that was happening at first, just because I think everyone was very shocked by that. But we talked about it in I don't remember if it was government or economics by that. I think it was economics. I don't know. But we talked about it in that class, and then we had a talk with Patrick Payton as well about it. And I think one way I helped, I prayed for them and stuff. I know when we did something for Easter and people here wrote letters. I wasn't involved in doing that because I was a part of something else with that. But I think writing letters and praying for them, because there's a lot of things that are going on there that in ways they're specifically like trying to protect the children and take care of them. So getting involved kind of changes back and forth, but I think asking someone that knows about the situation and getting involved in that way, and that's what I've kind of tried to do. And then something that Mr. Schumann brought up is donating Bibles in the languages that they speak. So
I didn't do any of those things, and I kind of feel bad about it. I read about it, and then I swiped to the next thing on my news feed. How do people just what advice would you give for people that to just avoid feeling guilty all the time for not doing enough?
I definitely don't think God is a God of guilt. I don't think he wants us to feel guilt and shame. I think that if you're... I don't want to say... That sounds wrong. I feel like if I say like, as long as you're, I don't want to say as long as you're doing this thing, then you don't, but because I don't think it's right to feel guilty, but I think if you do feel that way, then maybe it's kind of God trying to nudge you a certain amount to going and serving those people, or finding something that you're passionate about to serve in with people in your community. But I also don't think that guilt is from God. And so I think sometimes the enemy will try to shame us and make us feel like we're horrible people if we're not doing things like that. And I don't think that that's from God. So I think...
I like your point that maybe I do need some of that in my life to realize that I've just kind of isolated in my own bubble and surrounded myself with people like me, and if that's what it takes to kick me in gear, then so be it. So thank you.
Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit as you look forward to the future. So you said you're going to be going off to college, I guess in August, going to Texas Tech. How do you think you'll be able to continue to be an advocate for widows and orphans as a college student?
So I plan to get involved in a church in Tech. Well, I know that I will. I'm not. Anyways, and so my roommate actually is very invested and passionate about fostering as well, which is interesting because it's a whole potluck situation. But we've talked about getting involved in church and encouraging small groups we get involved in becoming certified to babysit. And I also plan, I think it's Buckner in Lubbock, that they're not just an agency in Lubbock, but they also have a group home. And so I hope to go and see if they need help there, or just step up, which is something I'm not always great at doing, stepping up and searching for things to do because I get nervous, but I plan and hope to do that. So.
Okay. We've done hard things today, so I think you can do that. Okay, really shifting gears. How many years did you play basketball?
Oh, that is really shifting gears.
Mm-hmm.
I played basketball 7th and 8th grade, and then I didn't play my freshman year, and then I played 10th and 11th grade, and then I managed this year.
Okay, so what are some things that you learned from being a part of a team?
I learned something Kenna talked about yesterday is everyone has a role, and my role may be different than Kenna because it involves serving and sitting on the bench more than serving on the court, right. Which is okay. And I think learning the importance of every role, something I think I hear a lot of people say, is this applying to fostering, or...
Well, I was going to bring it back around, but you might already be making the connection, so go ahead. Go ahead.
But I think something I hear a lot when talking about fostering is people feel like they're not equipped to, or they're not the right person to do it. But I think realizing that everyone has a role in that, and no matter what you feel like your strengths are, God will use them, and even your weaknesses, he'll find a way to help you in those areas. And so I think, yeah.
Okay, so you'll carry him forward. Okay. I'm going to pass it on.
All right, so just a couple more questions, and then we'll let you ask us some questions. So first is, all right, as a 40-year-old man who's a husband, a father, got kids doing soccer practice in a little bit, what's the single most important thing that I can do right now?
I think there are a lot of different things. Is there an area or a people group that you feel like you're most passionate about caring for? What would that be?
Who would that be?
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways my own kids.
Yeah.
And then just kind of radiating out from there. But I mean, sometimes I feel like it's all I can do to just kind of keep paddling in the storm, to keep going in the right direction with my own family, and kind of like Mr. Perea, feel guilty sometimes for not having the bandwidth to be able to help others. And so that's an area where I'm at. But I mean, that's a question that I ask myself a lot, is just, Lord, am I doing enough? just with all the brokenness that's in the world.
I think in caring for your family and being a good father, I think you already reflect that, and I think other people see that even if you don't realize. I think if you're out in public and you and your family are I guess having a good time and just you're being there for them and supporting them in everything they do, like you're a reflection to other people around you, and I think you are reflecting the importance of family still in a society full of individualism. I also think it's in small ways. Something that Dr. Logan talked about is if you see someone at the store, even like who seems to be having a rough time and they're getting onto their children and they seem overwhelmed, it can be in small things and just someone and saying like, hey, I see that you're having a hard time, but you're doing your job and you got this, and we've all been there. I think in small ways like that, you could because if someone said that to me, I think I would definitely remember that and remember like, oh, a stranger even noticed that in this moment I needed support. And I think things like that have a way bigger effect than we think.
And my last question for you, I mean, you've got a lot of people here that are listening, and so you have a chance to impact quite a bit of us. I know you've impacted me with your thesis. What is it that you hope to accomplish with your oral?
I wanted my oral to be more of a call of action. I wanted it to, I guess, show all different types of people that they can be involved in different ways in helping the foster community and parents and struggling people. And I think whether that means you're a young person or you're older and you have a family, I just wanted to show that every single person can do this and it's absolutely worth doing, and I think that's what I would want.
Well, I think you've definitely removed one of those obstacles from us with the oral of kind of taking away the unawareness.
Thank you.
And I mean, the judgment and the comfort, those are things I'm still struggling with.
Me too.
But you've removed that obstacle, and within this hour, and so I think this is an hour well spent. One of my favorite former tutors at Midland Classical is a guy named Chris Shaw. I don't know if he was around when you were here.
I've met him a few times.
But he would often ask students this question, just what breaks your heart and what are you doing about it? And that's the thing that God's calling you to do. And I see you embodying that, even though I don't know if he's ever asked you that question or not, but I see you embodying that. And so thank you for being a champion for those that need champions.
Thank you.
So with that, we give the mic over to you.
All right. I have the same question for all of y'all. It's just in talking about children and family and how important childhood is. What is a childhood memory that you would want to relive, or just one of your favorite childhood memories that you're really fond of?
I'm going to quote the Apostle Paul. I once was a child, but I put childish things behind me.
Okay.
The only one I can think of is very inappropriate. So, since it's the last oral, you heard this story probably about a week ago in Mr. Paria's office. So, I was 6 and innocent and on a sailboat at Lake Travis with my dad and one of my dad's college buddies. And so I'm just kind of sitting there just looking at the waves and the rocks and all the things that you can see in West Texas, listening to the conversation that's going on. And one of my dad's college buddies uses a choice word that can't be repeated in this context. And I picked up that's a negative word. That really adds some oomph to it. It's a lot better than shoot, which is what my family always said. So fast forward later that summer, we're playing around with the neighborhood kids, and they're like, hey, let's go to Daniel's house, which is like 4 or 5 houses down. So I just needed to tell my mom, hey, that's where I'm going. And so as soon as I go up, like, the whole neighborhood kids are out there. My mom opens the door, and it's like, oh, this is perfect. I can just ask, can we go over here? And she says, no, we're getting ready to go to the grocery store. And I said, "Oh, shoot." Only not shoot, right there in front of all the neighborhood kids. And so they were really impressed that I could just like drop that on my mom. And I thought, yeah. And then I saw my mom's face, and we did not go to the grocery store right then. We went inside the house, and I learned what that word really meant. And I'd like to say it was the last time I cussed, but...
Okay, so to clarify, she asked about one that you would like to recreate with your family. Am I right?
Relive or do over.
Oh, you want to relive or do over for yourself?
You want to do over that moment?
Do it differently.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
That's how I took your question.
Oh, yeah, that's good. I didn't know if you were excited about it.
Okay, well, I may have misunderstood the question then. And because I don't have a great story. I just recall my family was a very competitive family, and all raced cars or other motorcycles, bikes, like anything with wheels on it. And so I just know, a lot of people remember their childhood being filled with like going to the baseball field and going, like I think maybe your childhood soccer fields, things like that. But I mean, it just as a family, every weekend we were in the motorhome going to racetracks and doing that. But we were always together as a family and traveled together as a family. And so trying to make those memories, I think as Travis Boskamp would say, memories to hang your hat on. Those are the kind of things that I've tried to recreate from my childhood. So
That's awesome.
But maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, mine's not sappy either. So I'm going to go the Mr. Schumann direction, and I think I can bring it full circle. But I've seen mostly photos. I don't really actually remember this, but it's been replayed enough for me that I feel like I remember it. But up until about the age of 4, I still had moments after that. I was just as heathen as you could be, and so like I would throw all out tantrums. I don't think I've ever told anybody this in this room, maybe Mr. Schumann, but I would like, my mom would ask me to do something in a public place, and I would just like put my face on the ground and like pound my fists and feet on the ground until they would like have to leave and let me cry it out, and it would take like an hour for me to be done. And so to the point that I guess I was 2 when this happened. I got into one of my fits after, or I was playing in a playground and lost my balance at the top of a cargo net and fell down and injured myself. And I cried as I normally would when I was didn't get my way, and so I cried it out for about an hour. And my dad was like, "All right, he'll get over this." A day goes by, 2 days go by. I'm still not like walking. I'm like dragging myself around on my rear end, and they're like, "I bet he's trying to prove a point because this is just what AJ does when he's mad about something." And so finally, 2 days later, they're like, "Maybe there's something wrong with him this time." So they take me to the hospital, and my leg is broken. And so I had, I guess I had cried wolf enough times that my injured self could not be separated from my fit throwing self. So my parents just said, "AJ, I really hope that you have a kid like you when you grow up." And it's just, this is, guys especially in the room, do what you can to marry up, because Megan's gene pool was stronger than mine, and so my kids have their issues, but tantrum throwing was not one of them. So it's just, it brings me down a peg anytime that I think that I have it all together. So I'm reminded of that. Really, every time I see my relatives, they're like, "We thought you were going to end up in prison," and so look at me now. So. Well, Addi, you did a great job. Thank you for speaking with compassion and conviction, and like Mr. Schumann said, you gave us some real things to know about needs in our community and what to do about it. So I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
Mr. Schumann, will you close us in prayer?
God, thank you that you are always with us. Thank you for your love. Thank you for the belonging that we have in you and that you offer each of us. Lord, I pray that we would find ourselves in you each and every day, and that we would, as we do find ourselves in you, that we would not merely just stay comfortable in our own lives, but I pray that you would give us a heart to look outward. I pray that you would give us eyes to see those that are hurting around us. that you would move us to compassion, that you would move us to action, to be your hands and feet to those that do not know you and that need your help. God, I thank you for Addi. I thank you for her voice. I thank you for her faithfulness at MCA. I thank you for her faithfulness with the attic. I thank you for putting into her heart your heart, and the way that shines in the way that she lives and the way that was presented in this oral. And I thank you for all of the great things that you're going to do through her as she goes off to Lubbock. And it's in your Son's name that we pray these things. Amen.